For 10 years, I lived what seemed like the dream, a loving wife, 2 wonderful kids, and a job that kept the bills paid and the lights on. Lisa was the woman every man envied, beautiful, smart, always turning heads wherever we went. I used to feel proud, like I had something others didn't. But over time, the cracks in our perfect life started showing, small things that didn't make sense, moments when she seemed distant, almost like she was somewhere else. I chalked it up to the everyday struggles of marriage and raising a family, just like everyone else does. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to see it. Then, piece by piece, I started noticing what was really happening, the lies, the secrets, the deception I'd been blind to for years. Everything I thought I knew about our love, our family, our life, it was all a facade. And by the time I finally opened my eyes, I realized that I'd been living in a stranger's shadow for years. This is the story of how my perfect marriage came crashing down, and how the truth behind those small, seemingly insignificant details ripped our family apart in ways I never could have imagined. As time passed, life got more hectic. Between juggling work and raising the kids, we barely had time for each other anymore. We'd squeeze in a date night here and there, but even those started to feel more like chores than something to look forward to. She'd put on a nice dress, I'd try to keep my phone in my pocket, and we'd exchange polite small talk over dinner, pretending everything was just fine. But deep down, I knew something had changed. We stopped having those long, meaningful conversations. The intimacy was still there, technically, but it felt more like going through the motions than real passion. Lisa was still beautiful, still the same woman I married, but something in her gaze seemed different. At first, I brushed it off. After all, we're parents now. Everyone tells you that having kids changes things, and I accepted that. I love my kids more than anything, and I figured Lisa felt the same. But gradually, the distance between us grew, even if I didn't want to acknowledge it. Lisa started carving out more time for herself, hitting the gym, going out with friends, and taking weekend trips for yoga retreats. She claimed it was her way of keeping balanced, to not lose herself in the chaos of motherhood, and I understood. Everyone needs their space. Hell, I wasn't perfect either. I worked too many hours, came home late more nights than I'd like to admit, and when I wasn't at work, my mind was still on it. There were days I hardly noticed if she was around at all. But Lisa, she was always the backbone of our family, the one holding everything together. She took care of it all, doctor's appointments, school pickups, and the mess that was our hectic lives. I don't know if I ever thanked her properly for that. I probably didn't. I'll admit, I started feeling the strain too. A part of me knew we weren't as connected as we used to be, but I chalked it up to the years passing by. 10 years together, this is just what happens, right? I kept telling myself it was normal. What I didn't see was that the gap between us wasn't just from the wear and tear of everyday life, it was something deeper, something darker that had slowly been growing beneath the surface. Our son Jake had a big concert coming up. He'd been practicing non-stop for weeks, and his trumpet playing echoed through the house every evening, driving us a little nuts. But I knew how much it meant to him, and that made the noise worth it. He's a good kid, a sweet boy who still looks up to both of us. He gives us hugs before bed every single night and tells me everything about his day, down to the tiniest detail, his face lighting up when he talks about his friends and school. Then there's Molly, our little whirlwind of a daughter, so full of energy and laughter, always racing around the house, leaving a trail of chaos in her wake. If there's one thing I know for sure, it's that I love my kids more than I could ever put into words. That concert. It was a big deal for all of us, something we'd been anticipating for a while. Jake had been marking the days off his calendar, and I made sure to clear my schedule so I wouldn't miss it. Lisa seemed excited about it too, or at least, that's what she said. She even put on a little more effort than usual for a school event, dressing up a notch fancier. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she just wanted to look nice. But that night is when everything started to come undone. The evening of the concert kicked off like any other family outing. We left the house in a hurry, scrambling to get everyone ready and out the door on time. Lisa was holed up in the bathroom for what felt like an eternity, fixing her hair and touching up her makeup, while I tried to corral the kids into their seats. Jake was practically vibrating with excitement, unable to sit still, and Molly kept begging to bring her stuffed unicorn along. After some back and forth, I gave in, not really in the mood to argue. "Come on, Lisa, we're going to be late." I shouted up the stairs, fussing over Jake's rumpled shirt for what seemed like the 100th time. "I'm coming," she snapped, sounding irritated. She'd been edgy all week, more than usual. I chalked it up to stress. Between our jobs, the kids, and everything else, it made sense. We were all stretched thin. But the way she spoke that night, sharp, almost like she was mad at me for no reason, left me uneasy. When she finally made her way downstairs, she looked stunning, as always. She had on this sleek black dress that fit her perfectly, hugging every curve just right. It wasn't over the top, but she looked polished. Her hair was neatly styled, and her makeup was flawless. I remember thinking it was a bit much for a school concert, but I didn't say a word. Maybe she just needed to feel good about herself. Maybe she wanted me to notice. "You look great," I said, smiling at her, hoping to ease the strange tension lingering between us. She nodded, barely acknowledging my words, and grabbed her purse. The ride to the school was mostly quiet. Jake hummed a tune from one of his practice sessions, and Molly cuddled her stuffed animal in the back seat. Lisa sat beside me, staring out the window, her thoughts clearly somewhere else. I tried making some small talk, but it felt awkward, like we were strangers who no longer shared any common ground. When we pulled into the parking lot, Lisa suddenly snapped out of it. She turned to Jake with a big smile and said, "You ready, buddy? You're going to do awesome tonight." Jake's face lit up as he grinned back at her, his little chest swelling with pride. We filed into the school auditorium, found our seats, and settled in to wait for the show to start. I noticed Lisa checking her phone more often than usual, her fingers flying over the screen as she texted someone. Out of habit, I tried to sneak a look, but she turned it away before I could see anything. I brushed it off, probably just a friend or something harmless. The lights dimmed, and the kids started making their way onto the stage, small figures lined up in neat rows, clutching instruments almost bigger than they were. I spotted Jake scanning the audience for us, and I waved, giving him an encouraging thumbs up. He smiled nervously, and I felt that familiar surge of pride swell up in my chest. Despite everything else going on, I lived for moments like these, watching my kids grow and shine, becoming their own little people with dreams and personalities all their own. As the music began, I glanced over at Lisa, wanting to share that warm, proud feeling with her. But her seat was empty. She was gone. My heart skipped, and I looked around in confusion, searching the crowd for any sign of her. Maybe she'd just gone to the restroom, but she didn't say anything, not even a quick "I'll be right back." It was like she had just disappeared. A knot started forming in my stomach, a creeping unease that I couldn't shake off. My eyes scanned the darkened auditorium, trying to spot her in the dim light, but she was nowhere to be found. The music played on, and the other parents stayed focused on the kids, clapping softly, but I couldn't pay attention. My thoughts were spinning out of control. Where did she go? Why hadn't she mentioned anything? Maybe she stepped out to take a call, but why would she leave the entire building? I kept trying to talk myself down, telling myself I was just overreacting. But that tight feeling in my gut only grew stronger. After what felt like forever, the concert finally ended. The kids took their bows, and the auditorium erupted in applause. I clapped too, but half-heartedly, still distracted by Lisa's sudden absence. Jake looked over at me, his face glowing with pride, and I forced a smile, giving him a little wave. I didn't want him to know something was off. He deserved to soak in his big moment. When the applause died down and parents began filing out, I grabbed Molly's hand and made my way to the front of the stage to find Jake. He ran up, beaming from ear to ear. "Did you see me, Dad? Did you hear my solo?" "You were fantastic, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "You nailed it." "Where's Mom?" he asked, glancing around. That question hit me like a sucker punch. She'll be here in a minute," I lied, keeping my voice steady. I scanned the exits again, but still no sign of her. Panic started clawing at my chest. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that I didn't have my phone on me. I'd left it at home, charging, never thinking I'd actually need it tonight. I couldn't call her, couldn't check for any messages. I just stood there with our 2 kids, wondering where the hell my wife had gone. "Come on," I said, forcing a smile. "Let's head outside. I'm sure she's waiting for us." We stepped out into the cool night air, and I guided the kids to the parking lot, my eyes darting in every direction for a glimpse of Lisa. But she wasn't there. The longer we stood waiting, the more that familiar feeling churned in my gut, the one I'd been pushing down for months. Something wasn't right, and I had no idea what it was. By the time we finally made it home, that unease had turned into full-blown dread. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark, no sign of Lisa. My stomach twisted into knots as I unlocked the front door and led the kids inside. Jake was still buzzing from the concert, chattering away excitedly, and Molly was half asleep, dragging her stuffed unicorn behind her. "All right, you two, it's late, time for bed," I said, trying to sound calm, though my heart was racing. "Is Mom coming home soon?" Jake asked, his face suddenly anxious, like he could sense the tension in my voice. "She's probably just out running an errand or something," I lied again, ruffling his hair. "Don't worry about it. She'll be back before you know it." I didn't believe a word I was saying, and from the look on Jake's face, I could tell he didn't buy it either. But what else could I do? I didn't want to frighten him, not tonight, not after everything he'd been excited about for weeks. I tucked them both into bed, lingering by Jake's door a little longer after I switched off the lights. His breathing slowed, turning soft and even, and I knew he'd finally drifted off. But I was wide awake, my mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. Where on earth was Lisa? I went downstairs and checked the kitchen, no note, no missed call on the landline, absolutely nothing to explain her sudden disappearance. I stared at my phone, still plugged in and charging on the counter. There was no way to contact her, no clue about where she could be or when she might come back. I wandered through the house in a daze, pacing from room to room, trying to piece it all together. Lisa had been distant lately, but this? Disappearing without a word. Skipping out on our son's big night. This wasn't just her being aloof, this was something different, something darker. I dropped onto the couch, my mind racing through the last few months, desperately searching for the moment things started falling apart. Was it when she began dressing up more? Those extra hours she put in at the gym? The nights she claimed she was out with friends? The way she seemed glued to her phone, texting people I didn't know? I tried convincing myself it was just stress, that she needed space. But now, sitting alone in the darkened living room, that sinking feeling in my gut told me there was more to it than that. Hours ticked by, and there was still no sign of her. I tried distracting myself by flipping through TV channels, but I wasn't really watching. My eyes kept drifting to the clock, 10:30, then 11 o'clock, then midnight. Where the hell was she? Just when I was about to lose it, I heard the front door creak open. I froze, sitting up straight, my heart hammering in my chest. Lisa stepped inside, moving quietly like she didn't want to wake anyone. The second she noticed me sitting there, her body stiffened. "You're still up?" she asked, her voice a little too casual, too practiced. "Where the hell were you?" I asked, keeping my voice low but tight. I was struggling to hold it together for the kid's sake, but inside, I was simmering. She blinked at me, a flicker of something, maybe surprise, crossing her face before she quickly masked it. I just needed some air. The concert was a bit much, she said, brushing past me and heading for the stairs. I followed her. Air. You needed air for 3 hours. You couldn't have told me where you were going, or, I don't know, brought your phone so I could at least check in. She didn't answer right away, just kept climbing the stairs, her back to me. When we reached the bedroom, she spun around, her expression hard and defensive. God, John, do you have to interrogate me the second I walked through the door? I was floored by the way she turned it around on me, the sheer nerve of it. Interrogate you? You walked out without saying a word, missed Jake's concert, and now you can't even explain where you were. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped to a low, dangerous whisper. I told you I needed some air. It's not a crime to leave the house for a few hours. Lisa, this isn't normal. You've been acting strange for months. It's like I don't even know who you are anymore. The words tumbled out faster than I'd meant, and I felt a pang of desperation rising in my chest. It was like I was grasping at something that was slipping further and further away. She crossed her arms, her gaze cold and distant. Maybe you don't know me anymore. Maybe you've been so wrapped up in work and everything else that you haven't even noticed what's been happening with me. Did you ever consider that? Her words hit me hard. She wasn't entirely wrong. I'd been buried in my job, overwhelmed by the stress of bills, deadlines, and the constant demands of work. But that didn't justify this, walking out without a word, shutting me out like I didn't matter. I had 1,000 questions burning inside me, but it didn't seem to matter. I could see it in her eyes, whatever was going on, she wasn't going to tell me the truth. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Maybe, she muttered, turning away and heading for the bathroom. She didn't even look back. The sound of the door clicking shut behind her felt like the final nail sealing us off. I stood there for a long time, just staring at that closed door, waiting for something, anything, that could help me make sense of what was happening between us. But nothing came. Just silence. Eventually, I turned around and went downstairs, my head a mess of anger, confusion, and a raw sense of betrayal that I couldn't fully explain. I pulled a beer from the fridge and sat down at the kitchen table, my thoughts spinning. Every instinct in me screamed that this wasn't just a case of needing space or blowing off steam. There was something more to it. I could feel it. But what was I supposed to do without any proof? I sat there for hours, replaying the last few months over and over, wondering how I'd missed the signs. It was all there, but I'd been blind, refusing to see it. By the time I finally forced myself to bed. It was nearly morning by then, and Lisa was already there, either fast asleep or pretending to be. I lay on my back, staring blankly at the ceiling, feeling the icy distance between us, like an invisible wall I just couldn't break through. The next morning, everything felt unreal, like I was walking through a fog. I got the kids ready for school while Lisa stayed upstairs, avoiding me. She barely said a word since coming home last night, and I didn't push her for answers. I already knew I wouldn't get the truth, not now. Jake was his usual chatty self during breakfast, eagerly recounting every tiny detail of his trumpet solo. I nodded along, but I wasn't really there. My thoughts kept circling back to Lisa's sudden disappearance, to the cold, dismissive look on her face when she'd come home. It ate away at me, this unsettling suspicion that had now taken root deep in my mind. Something was definitely off. So off that it felt like my whole world was starting to crumble. Emma's little hand tugged at my sleeve, pulling me out of my daze. "Daddy, can I bring my unicorn to school?" "Sure, sweetie," I replied absently, finishing off my coffee and grabbing the car keys. "Let's get going." We piled into the car, and I drove them to school, forcing myself to focus on the mundane routine. Drop-offs were always a bit of a circus, but today, it felt like I was just going through the motions. When I waved goodbye and watched Jake and Emma disappear into the school building, I stayed in the car for a moment, staring blankly at the dashboard, trying to get a grip. Everything felt off. Way off, like something big was looming. I could feel it. I started heading toward work, but halfway there, it hit me, I'd forgotten my phone. Again. I cursed under my breath. Lately, I'd been forgetting things constantly, appointments, my keys, and now my phone. My head was all over the place. Lisa's strange behavior, the tension between us, it had thrown me completely out of balance. So, I turned the car around, knowing I wouldn't be able to get through the day without my phone. The house was only a few minutes away, and I figured it'd be a quick in and out, grab the phone, and head right back to the office. Simple enough. But when I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Lisa's car still parked there. That's odd. I had expected her to be gone by now, off to the gym or running errands. My heart started beating a little faster as I approached the front door. Something about the quietness of the house didn't sit right. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the silence hitting me like a wall. I was about to head to the kitchen, where I'd left my phone charging, but then I heard it, a sound, muffled at first, coming from upstairs. I stopped dead, straining to listen. Laughter. Male laughter. I froze in the entryway, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. There were more voices now, not just one, but several, talking and laughing. My stomach twisted with a sickening dread, but my legs started moving on their own, carrying me quietly up the stairs. I crept toward our bedroom, the door slightly ajar. The voices got louder, clearer. I could hear Lisa too, her voice mixed in with theirs. My hand shook as I pushed the door open just a crack, and then everything shattered. There she was, my wife, the woman I'd spent the last decade of my life with, naked, tangled in a mess of sheets, surrounded by 5 men. Jesus, they were all over her, their hands and mouths on every inch of her. Lisa was in the middle of it all, completely lost in the moment, oblivious to everything around her, including me, standing right there, watching. The sight punched the breath out of me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It felt like I was trapped in some twisted nightmare, but it was real. All too real. I wanted to scream, to storm in there and tear the whole place apart, to drag those bastards out of my house and throw them into the street. But something stopped me, the shock, the sheer betrayal, it rooted me to the spot. And then, coldly, almost mechanically, my hand went for my phone. I pulled it out, switched on the camera, and hit record. The sounds filled the room, moans, whispers, laughter, and I caught it all. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands trembling as I filmed Lisa and her lovers. They didn't even notice me. They were too caught up in each other, too wrapped up in whatever sick thrill they were chasing, to realize I was standing right there. I kept filming for what felt like forever, even though it was probably just a few minutes. I held the camera steady, zooming in on Lisa's face, watching as her expression twisted in pure pleasure, the kind she hadn't shown with me in months, maybe even years. It was like staring at a complete stranger. When I finally couldn't take it anymore, I turned off the camera, slid the phone into my pocket, and backed out of the room just as quietly as I'd entered. None of them noticed me leave. None of them knew I'd been standing there, shattered and empty. I walked downstairs, my legs weak and unsteady, my mind racing but oddly focused. The betrayal scorched through me like a fire, but I knew one thing for sure, this was it. There was no going back. I got into my car and drove off, not really sure where I was headed. I just knew I couldn't stay in that house, not after what I'd witnessed. I ended up parked outside a small law office, a building I'd driven past countless times on my way to work but had never really noticed. It wasn't until I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, that it hit me why I was there. Divorce. There was no other way forward. I stepped out of the car, feeling like a shell of myself, and walked inside. The receptionist looked up and greeted me, but her words barely registered. I was numb. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. I shook my head slowly. "I need a divorce lawyer," I replied, my voice flat and lifeless. She nodded, picking up on the urgency in my tone, and gestured for me to take a seat while she called someone in. I dropped into the chair, my hands still trembling as I held onto my phone, the recording of Lisa's betrayal burning a hole in my pocket. The proof of everything I'd lost was right there, the evidence of my broken life condensed into a few sickening minutes. I stared blankly at the floor, waiting for the lawyer, wondering how the hell it had all come to this. As I sat there, the images of Lisa tangled up with those men kept replaying in my head, burned into my brain like a brand. The betrayal felt alive, a living, breathing thing inside me, eating away at every part of me. I thought I had a handle on my life, my marriage, my family. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Michael Shaw, finally sat across from me, going over the options with a cold, practiced efficiency. But I barely heard him. My thoughts were somewhere darker, somewhere far beyond the paperwork he was laying out. I didn't want just a clean break from Lisa. I wanted to erase her, erase this entire life that had crumbled around me. "I need to protect my kids," I interrupted, cutting him off mid-sentence. My voice sounded hollow, distant, but there was a hard edge to it, something new. Shaw nodded thoughtfully. "We can absolutely aim for primary custody, especially with the evidence you have," he said, eyeing the phone I held in my hand. "That video alone will be enough to make your case strong, but you need to tread carefully. We'll file for divorce, and then you'll need to." "I don't think you understand," I cut in sharply, leaning forward. "I don't want a long, drawn-out divorce. I don't want mediation or custody battles. I want out completely. I want to disappear with my kids." Shaw's brow furrowed, and he leaned back slightly, clearly surprised by my intensity. "Disappear? That's, not exactly. Can it be done?" I demanded, my voice tight. "I'll pay whatever it takes. I just want to get as far away from her as possible. I don't want her anywhere near my children, not after what she did, not after what I saw." My voice cracked, but I forced myself to keep it steady, gripping the armrests of the chair like I was holding on for dear life. Shaw stared at me for a long moment, his gaze narrowing. "It's not legal, you realize that, right? If you just vanish, especially with your kids, it'll be considered kidnapping. You'll lose everything in the long run." I ground my teeth together. She lost everything the second she brought those men into our bed. Shaw didn't say a word at first, just leaned back in his chair and studied me. "Listen, I know someone, a private investigator who specializes in making people disappear, if that's really what you're after. It's not going to come cheap, and it's definitely not above board, but he's pulled it off before. New identities, new lives, the whole deal." "How much?" I murmured, my voice barely audible. He named a figure that made my stomach tighten, but I didn't flinch. "I'll pay it," I said. "Whatever it takes." Shaw nodded, scribbling a name and number on a slip of paper before sliding it across the desk. "His name is Frank. He's discreet, and he's the best at what he does. But you'll need cash, a lot of it. I suggest draining your joint accounts as soon as possible, before she catches on to what's happening." I stared at the name written there, the letters blurring as I looked at it. This was it, the point where there was no turning back. A cold calm washed over me, the kind that comes when you're on the brink of doing something irreversible, something dangerous. I stood up, folding the paper and tucking it into my pocket. "I'll be in touch." The drive home was a blur, a whirlwind of thoughts and plans swirling around in my head, taking shape the second I stepped through the door. I booted up my laptop and logged into our joint savings account. We had a decent amount set aside, enough to vanish, enough to start over. Without a second thought, I transferred nearly all of it into an account I'd opened years ago, one Lisa had no idea even existed. The screen blinked transaction complete, and a rush of adrenaline shot through me. There was no turning back now. Next, I headed upstairs to pack a few bags. Lisa still wasn't home, probably still tangled up in that filthy mess she called her life. The thought of her wrapped up with those men again made my blood boil, but I couldn't afford to let my anger take over. Not now. I had to focus. I grabbed the essentials for Jake and Emma, clothes, a few toys, and anything they'd need for the next few days, maybe longer. Then I went into our bedroom, the room where it had all fallen apart. My hands were trembling as I rifled through the drawers, snatching up anything of value, watches, jewelry, things I could sell quickly if I needed to. I found one of Lisa's bracelets and nearly crushed it in my fist, but I stopped myself. Not yet. There was something I needed to handle first. Frank, the private investigator, agreed to meet me at a grimy office downtown. He was exactly what I expected, rough around the edges, no nonsense, with a face etched by the things he'd seen and wished he hadn't. He didn't waste time with questions, just outlined the process in the simplest, bluntest terms. New names, new IDs. I'll get you birth certificates, driver's licenses, social security numbers, everything you need to become someone else. But it's going to cost you, he said, his voice low and gravelly. I handed him the thick envelope stuffed with cash, everything I'd taken from our accounts. He flipped through it quickly, then nodded, satisfied. This'll cover it. You'll also have to cut ties with anything that can lead back to you, phones, credit cards, bank accounts, the whole lot. I'll set up a new bank account in your new name, but you can't leave any trail behind. No slipping up. No going back. I felt the weight of his words, but I was past the point of caring. I understand, I said firmly. This was the plan now. I understand, I replied, my voice steady as a rock. When can we leave? Give me a week, he said calmly. I'll have everything set up by then. In the meantime, keep your head down. Don't draw any attention to yourself. I walked out of his office feeling an odd mix of relief and dread. Just 7 days. That was all the time I had to tie up the loose ends of my life. After that, we'd disappear, and Lisa would never be able to find us. Back at the house, I stood in the doorway, staring at the walls, the floors, and all the familiar furniture. I must have been there for hours, flooded by memories, good ones, bad ones, all twisted now by what had happened. This place, once filled with life and laughter, was nothing more than an empty shell, a reminder of all the lies that had torn us apart. I couldn't leave it standing. The idea hit me like a lightning bolt, burn it down. Burn the whole damn thing to the ground. I went out to the garage, grabbed a can of gasoline, and began pouring it throughout the house, down the stairs, across the furniture, into every corner of every room. By the time I finished, the smell of gas was overwhelming, thick and suffocating. I stood at the doorway, gripping a matchbook, my pulse hammering in my ears. This was it, the end of everything. I struck the match. The flames erupted instantly, spreading faster than I'd imagined, swallowing the house in a hungry orange blaze. I stayed there for a moment, just watching as the fire devoured everything we'd built, everything that had already been ruined, and then I turned and walked away. Frank had everything ready within the week, new IDs, new names. John Miller was gone, replaced by someone else entirely. I picked up Jake and Emma from school, telling them we were going on a little trip, that we'd be staying somewhere new for a while. They were too young to understand what was really happening, and for that, I was grateful. We drove out of town without looking back. By the time anyone realized we were missing, we'd be halfway across the country, living under new identities, starting from scratch. Lisa would be left with nothing, no home, no money, no kids. I was finally free, and so were my children. Watching the flames that night, I felt something lift, like a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Knowing Lisa would come back to nothing but ash and ruin felt almost cleansing. For the first time in ages, I could breathe. But even as I drove away from the wreckage of my old life, I knew this wasn't truly over. The real challenge was just beginning, starting over, building a new life with my kids, and making sure Lisa never found us. Frank was thorough. He made sure everything was in place. He warned me that making a clean break like this wasn't going to be easy. It would take time for us to fully vanish, time to ensure we never popped up on anyone's radar again. But I trusted him. He was relentless, professional, and kept his word. Over the next few weeks, as we settled into our new routine, Frank became my only connection to the life I'd left behind, updating me on everything that happened after I torched the house. The first few days after we disappeared felt like a blur, almost surreal. I drove through the night with Jake and Emma, trying to field their questions without giving too much away. "Where's Mommy?" Emma asked, her voice trembling with confusion. "She's busy right now, sweetie," I said softly, keeping my eyes on the road. "But we're going on a little adventure, okay? We're heading somewhere new, meeting new people. It'll be fun." I felt like the worst kind of liar. Jake didn't say much, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew something was off, even if he couldn't piece it all together. He was too sharp, too observant for his own good. Our new home was in a quiet little town in another state, far enough away that Lisa wouldn't be able to track us down easily. Frank had taken care of everything, the house, our new identities, even enrolling the kids in a local school. The name on my new ID felt strange, like a costume I couldn't quite fit into. But I had no choice, this was who we were now. The first few weeks were brutal. Jake and Emma struggled with their mom's sudden absence, and no matter how much I tried to reassure them, I couldn't ease their confusion. Jake withdrew into himself, quiet, sullen, while Emma cried herself to sleep almost every night, asking when Mommy was coming back. It tore me up inside, but I couldn't tell them the truth. I couldn't explain that their mom had betrayed us, that she'd torn our world apart. Instead, I tried to focus on creating some semblance of a new normal. I found a job as a construction supervisor at a small local company, similar to what I'd done before. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept food on the table and a roof over our heads. The kids started school and slowly, painfully, began adjusting to the new routine. I tried my best to make things feel normal, but I knew they could sense the strain I was under, the constant edge I lived on. Meanwhile, Frank kept feeding me updates on what was happening back home. He was thorough, sending detailed reports every week. I devoured them, desperate to know what had become of Lisa. The first piece of news hit harder than I'd expected. "She's been looking for you," Frank said over the phone. "She came back to find the house burned to the ground, and ever since, she's been on a warpath. She filed a missing persons report, claiming you took off with the kids. The local police are digging into it, but they don't have much to go on." I thought I'd feel a grim sort of satisfaction knowing she had nothing left, no home, no family, no money, but all I felt was a hollow emptiness. It was strange, imagining her frantically trying to piece together what had happened, trying to find us. In another life, I might have cared, but now she was just a shadow, a ghost of a past I was determined to bury. "Is she dangerous?" I asked quietly. "Not in the way you're thinking," Frank replied. "She's furious, sure, but I think her pride took the hardest hit. From what I've dug up, she's been trying to rebuild, staying with friends, crashing in motels. She's broke, desperate. The guys she was with scattered pretty quick. She's on her own." Hearing that gave me a momentary flicker of satisfaction. She deserved it. After everything she put us through, she deserved to be utterly alone. But the kids, they were struggling. Emma took it the hardest. She'd always been so close to Lisa, and no matter how much I tried, I couldn't fill that void for her. Every night, she'd ask, "When's Mommy coming home?" And every night, I'd tell her the same lie, "Soon, sweetheart, soon." But I knew it would never be soon. It would never be anything. Jake, though, He just kept pulling further and further into himself, his silence deepening with every passing day. He barely said a word to me, just nodding when I asked him about school or if he needed something. I could see the weight of it all pressing down on his small shoulders, and it broke my heart. At first, we stayed under the radar. I didn't want to draw any attention, and I didn't want the kids asking too many uncomfortable questions. But as the days went by, they started making friends. Slowly, the shadows of what we left behind began to lift, and they began to smile again. Emma made a best friend at school, a bright, bubbly girl named Lily, who quickly became a fixture at our place for playdates and sleepovers. Jake, always the quieter one, found his niche in the school's chess club, connecting with a few other reserved kids over strategy in quiet competition. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. They were adjusting to this new life, even though the questions about their mother still lingered in the background. I never gave them answers, dodging the topic whenever it came up. I hoped that, eventually, they'd stop asking. As for me, the new job became my lifeline. The work was straightforward, just overseeing crews, making sure projects ran on time. I didn't have to think too hard, and for that, I was thankful. I threw myself into the routine, even volunteering to stay late some nights to avoid going back home, where the reminders of everything I'd done still haunted me. But no matter how deep I buried myself in the work, the guilt clung on, the guilt of lying to my kids, the guilt of torching the life we'd built, the guilt of running. Frank's updates started coming less frequently as time went by. Lisa was still searching, still trying to figure out where we'd gone, but she had nothing to go on. She was living out of motels, scraping by on whatever was left of her savings, with no sign of getting back on her feet. Eventually, her attempts to track us down became more sporadic, her efforts slowing as reality began to settle in. "She's fading," Frank said during one of his final reports. "She's not making waves anymore. No one's looking for you. You're safe." Safe, the word felt foreign now, like something out of reach. I did what I had to do to protect the kids, to get us away from the mess Lisa had made, but were we really safe? Could we ever truly leave the past behind? I didn't know. All I knew was that one life had gone up in flames, and I was struggling to build something new from the wreckage. The kids were starting to mend. Jake had come out of his shell a little, even cracking a few smiles during dinner. Emma still asked about her mom now and then, but the tears had dried up. They were finding their footing, making friends, settling into the new city, and in those small glimpses of normalcy, I found a sliver of peace. As for me, I had no choice but to keep moving forward. There was no going back, and I couldn't afford to dwell on what I'd left behind. The only way through this was to keep pushing forward. One evening, after putting Jake and Emma to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the phone that held the videos. They were still there, every filthy, gut-wrenching second of it. I'd captured the whole thing, the laughter, the moans, the full extent of Lisa's betrayal, all in vivid, undeniable detail. I was never a man driven by revenge, but after everything she'd done, I couldn't resist the pull of retribution any longer. Lisa had humiliated me. She'd torn apart our family and left me feeling powerless. But now, it was my turn. I knew she was still searching for us, desperately trying to find any trace, but she had no idea what was coming her way. I spent hours that night creating anonymous email accounts, one after another. No names, no traces, nothing that could be linked back to me. I uploaded the videos, each one edited carefully to make it absolutely clear who Lisa was and exactly what she was doing. I didn't need to add anything. The footage spoke for itself. Then I made a list. I started with the people closest to her, her friends, the ones she spent hours gossiping with, the ones who admired her like she was some perfect wife and mother. They would be the first to see the truth, to see her for who she really was. One by one, I sent the videos, attaching short, cold messages. "Thought you should know who Lisa really is." Each click of the mouse felt like a small victory, a sense of regaining control over something that had spiraled so far out of my grasp. But I didn't stop there. Her coworkers were next. I'd met a few of them at holiday parties and company events. They'd been polite, smiling, shaking my hand. But now they'd see the real Lisa. I sent the videos to her boss, her colleagues, anyone who had even a remote professional connection to her. "This is your model employee, Lisa." The satisfaction I felt was eerie, almost clinical. It wasn't the rush of anger or vengeance I'd expected. It was something quieter, a calm, methodical sense of justice, a deep, cold satisfaction as I pictured the shock, the disgust, spreading through her social circles and workplace. I wasn't just exposing her, I was destroying the false image she'd crafted so carefully over the years. The next morning, as I stood in front of the mirror, shaving for work, I couldn't help but imagine what was happening back in our old town. Lisa would wake up, go about her morning routine, completely unaware of the ticking time bomb I'd set off. By the time she arrived at work, her colleagues would already be whispering. Maybe her friends were flooding her phone, sending messages she'd be terrified to read. Maybe she'd log into her email, only to find the videos staring back at her, undeniable proof of the nightmare she couldn't escape. That day, I went to work as usual. The kids went to school. And for the first time in what felt like forever, things felt normal. I even caught myself smiling a few times. The weight of her betrayal wasn't completely gone, but it was lighter. I'd done what I needed to do. I'd fought back. A few days later, Frank, the private investigator, called with an update. I'd asked him to keep tabs on Lisa, to let me know how she was holding up now that she had lost everything, no family, no money, no home. He didn't know about the videos, of course. That part had been mine alone. "Your wife's in a bit of a mess," Frank said, his voice rough and businesslike. "Word's gotten around. I'm not sure what happened, but her company let her go. Sounds like some inappropriate material surfaced." I could hear the uncertainty in his tone, like he didn't want to pry too deeply into the details. "She's been trying to reach you, but there's no way she'll find you now. I've made sure of that." "Good," I muttered, feeling that cold satisfaction settle in again. "Let her search all she wants. She's crashing with a friend for now," Frank continued, "but she's struggling. Most people have turned their backs on her. I'd say she's hit rock bottom. You wanted to know when she'd get there, well, she's there." I leaned back in my chair, letting the words sink in. Lisa was finished, her reputation, her career, every bit of respect she'd built up over the years, it was all gone, reduced to ashes by her own choices. The videos had done exactly what I'd hoped. They'd stripped away the mask she'd worn for so long. "Thanks for the update," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Keep an eye on her, just to be safe." "Will do," Frank replied. "But I don't think she's a threat anymore. You've got nothing to worry about." We ended the call, and I sat there, staring blankly at my phone. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was this hollow emptiness. I'd gotten my revenge, but it hadn't filled the void inside me. The damage was done, not just to Lisa, but to all of us. Jake and Emma still asked about their mom, still wondered when they'd see her again. They didn't know the full story, and they never would, but they felt the loss. Those videos had been my way of reclaiming some sense of control, of turning the tables on Lisa, but even after all the chaos and after everything of hers had been destroyed, I knew deep down that the real damage had been to our family. My kids would never be the same. I would never be the same. In the weeks that followed, the emails spread like wildfire. I got fragments of updates from Frank, how Lisa had become a pariah among her friends, how her spotless reputation had crumbled into dust. The company couldn't keep her on after that, not with those explicit videos circling around. She was done for, unemployable, ruined. And yet, even with her completely shattered, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel peace. But what I did feel was a stark, unshakable truth. I had burned down my life, just like I had burned down that house, and in the smoldering wreckage, I'd created something new, something free from her deceit. I had made sure of that. I didn't know where life would lead us next, but for now, I had my kids, a new job, and a chance to rebuild from scratch. As for Lisa, she was nothing but a ghost now, condemned to drift through the ruins of her own choices, a reminder of the life I'd left behind.